Your manuscript needs a fresh set of eyes. This episode, a conversation with editor Laura Carroll.
No one, I don't care how good an editor or proofer you are, no one can edit or proof their own work. I'm convinced of that. I'm here to tell about it with my own books. With my first book, I really thought I could proof it. Then it came out and boom, there were several typos. So as much as we think we can do it, we're too close to the material, even when we leave it for a little while. So a professional editor can look at the content with fresh eyes to make sure it's being stated the best way possible and error-free.
I'm Chris Well, and this is DIY Author. You're an author. Maybe you're taking the traditional route. Maybe you've chosen an independent path. Or maybe you want the best of both worlds. Wherever you want to go as a writer, DIY Author is here to help you on your journey with advice, encouragement, and practical tips. Because do it yourself doesn't have to mean do it alone. Welcome to DIY Author. I'm your host, Chris Well. We have a great interview lined up with Laura Carroll, who helps writers with book production, public speaking, and more. But first, I want to make sure you know about a brand new download that I have just for you. One of the problems with promoting your book is that there are so many moving parts, and it is easy to get overwhelmed. Well, if that's something you struggle with, I encourage you to download our free blueprint for your author media campaign. Go to www.diyauthor.com/blueprint, and this is one of those cases where you actually do have to include the W's. Your free author media campaign blueprint will help you organize your media plan for success. Download your free copy at www.diyauthor.com/blueprint. My guest this episode is an editor, an author, a bookseller, and a public speaking coach. In this interview, we discuss why an author can't edit his or her own work, the best thing about Twitter, and why an author may want to take up public speaking. Now my conversation with editor Laura Carroll. Welcome, Laura. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with you as an editor. Tell us about your editorial services.
I've been editing professionally really for about 20 years in one capacity or another. But since 2007, I've run Carroll Communications. And in the editorial side of things, I mostly work with professionals and nonfiction writers on their nonfiction books. But I also do a variety of editing for businesses, nonprofits, from their corporate communications, fundraising materials, all kinds of documents that if it needs editing, odds are I've probably edited it.
And I noticed looking at the list here, I mean, it's almost, I don't mean to diminish it, but it almost seems like no job is too small. Like any kind of writing that a nonfiction person is working on, from a blog to a book, anywhere in that gamut, you have clients that run that gamut.
I have had clients that pretty much run that gamut, yes.
And then you also you do book development. Tell us about the part of your company that does book development.
Well, I work with a great team. I have a cover artist as well as a really great interior formatter. So we've developed 3 packages. One is really just a manuscript evaluation that I do. And so I just look at manuscript drafts and do an analysis of what the strengths and the weaknesses are of the book to that point, then discuss that with the client. But the other packages really include my cover artist and the interior formatter, where level 1, I have the cover artist come up with some cover images, and we go through the process of selecting a final one, and it includes the formatting. And level 2 includes the cover art as well as the formatting, and then 1 round of comprehensive editing that I do. So it's a kind of a stair-step approach.
And then you also have, part of your company is public speaking services. It says public speaking coaching, speech, writing and editing, and media skill building. Could you tell us what all those are about?
Sure. That was an outgrowth of some things I did earlier in my career, where I was involved in education and training, and I led many seminars and really honed my own presentation skills over the years, and also have worked a lot with attorneys for their courtroom communications on opening statements, closing arguments, speeches, and have worked professionally with executives who need to write speeches, do well at, public events, etc. And then I've published 3 of my own nonfiction books that have gotten very good media, syndicated radio and television. So with all of that, I honed a really good, set of skills that I can help not only authors with when their books come out, to help their own public speaking skills become more effective, but just professional clients that I may have that want to hone their skills in that way as well.
Looking at media skill building versus public speaking, you're talking about both I'm standing in front of the crowd, but also this is how I conduct myself in an interview, right?
Correct, yes. So it could be an author who has to go to a book signing and talk about their book for an hour and they want to do that more effectively. It could also be someone who just needs to give a speech at a professional event, that sort of thing. So yes, it's 2 different animals, but really some of it's very similar in terms of how to be comfortable, how to be articulate, and be prepared for the kind of communication you need to give in front of an audience.
Now, is this something that all authors should be thinking about, or are there particular kinds of authors that are ideal candidates for help with public speaking?
I think in my opinion, every author should have some level of good public speaking skills. So no matter if you're a novelist or nonfiction, to feel comfortable in talking to more than just 1 or 2 people at a time and to know the goals of your communication, I think it's key in the whole publicity process.
And as we mentioned, you're also a bookseller. Why don't you tell us about your bookstore?
Well, a few years ago, I wanted to start a unique nonfiction book collection on my site, just as a way for people to learn about some books I thought were great. So I have over time categorized them into different areas, but I saw that a theme was building there that I call it the Live True book collection. And so it's just a theme that's about books that in one way or another are about how to live your best life, how to live true to yourself. And that's something those are books that I look for and that I review on the site. And I thought it was a unique way to get a slice of a really good book collection that people could learn about.
You've written what, 3 books?
Yes.
Okay, 3 books. And then you're also a HuffPost contributor.
Yes.
And it's all the same topic, isn't it?
Oh, on HuffPo, I think my posts they relate to more of 2 of my books rather than all of them.
Okay.
One would be my most recent book called The Baby Matrix, and it really looks at society's assumptions about parenthood and reproduction, and in some respects challenges those and looks at how we think about it today. How is it no longer serving our society as it is today? How are those assumptions? Maybe they were never even really true to begin with. So it really takes a sociological look at parenthood. And that was really driven by my previous book that really received international acclaim. It was called Families of Two, and it really looked at couples who chose not to have children by choice. And it's a collection of interviews of people married a long time who made that choice. So I learned a lot about that in the process. And it eventually led me to write The Baby Matrix, because I started to ask the question, well, why does society look at people who don't have children as so odd? And why do they find it hard to accept, etc.? So I find that the themes of both of those books do drive many of the HuffPo posts, and I led a top blog called La Vie Child Free for a while when Families of Two, on the heels of some large publicity efforts. So I find that people seek me out for topics related to that.
How do you become a HuffPost contributor? Are they reprinting things you wrote somewhere else? Are you writing them for specifically? How does that work?
You write specific, unique content for HuffPo, and now it could be different now, but when I first approached them, you have to approach them with a post, and they look at it, and if they decide they want to post it, then they do. And so once you make that hurdle, you're pretty much in, but making that first hurdle is pretty competitive. So although there are a lot of people who contribute, they still screen people pretty aggressively, I find. But once you're in, you're in. And these days, even with the post, they used to go through and really edit it and make sure that there were no typos, etc., before it went on. And now they leave it to you. So when I prepare a post, I usually draft it on the back end of HuffPo, and then I leave it for at least a few hours, maybe a day. So I plan it like that, so I can look at it with fresh eyes to make sure there's no typos that I see once it goes live.
I mean, you have this wide variety of things that you do. They're all part of your business. How did you come to create a business that is all of these different things at the same time? Because they are related. It's not like you're a janitor and you're an engineer and you
Right.
do cars, but on the other hand, it's a lot of different things.
Well, I look at it more as one reason I called it Carroll Communication. So it's all about communication. So editing is definitely a way to make communications, no matter what the purpose is, more effective. So again, that can take many different forms. And verbal communication, in this world today, anything we do professionally, I think knowing the goal of your oral communication is key to really doing it effectively. So the two really, really work together. So it may seem like I'm in two particular areas, but I think they dovetail each other beautifully. Now, the third is, the book selling. I want to encourage people who have books to, and if they want them to be a downloadable product, an ebook, for example, I want to build a library of really good nonfiction books that fit that live true theme. So the book selling piece is something that's more adjunct and it just supports the other two. And also it's a way for people to learn about great books on my site.
Starting out, how were you first introduced to books and reading?
First introduced, probably very young. I was one of those kids where I loved to sit in a corner and read books. Pippi Longstocking, was a book that always comes to mind that I remember reading over and over and loved it. So I was a kid who just loved stories, loved reading novels. And so my nose was in a book from an early age. So I've always loved books. I always was a kid I could sit in the library for hours, and that's still true for me today. It's one of my favorite places to go.
And then so with the business that you have now, are there any particular kinds of authors or genres or books that you specialize with or that you would rather avoid working with?
I really specialize in nonfiction, and just because I think my experience, that's where I have the most extensive experience, and it's also nonfiction is really where, of the two, of fiction versus nonfiction, really I'm a nonfiction lover, so it keeps me in the genre that I like most, at least these days.
With the other pieces of your business, are you more likely to gravitate towards those kinds of authors that would also go in your store, or does that not cross over that much?
Oh, well, of course I would. I look at the topics of the book to see if there's that possibility for sure, but it's certainly not a criterion that I would use to say, no, I don't want to have you as my client. I think that if it's a good idea, and sometimes honestly, even if I'm not sure of the saleability, I go at it anyway and help that person make that book be as best as it can be, and give them some tips on really how to do the publicity about it.
What is the best thing an author can do when they contact you?
I think just really to know, at the very least, have a draft of some kind, even if it's incomplete, and also have a vision for what they want that book to accomplish. What inspired the vision to write it to begin with? What would they say on their deathbed about that book if it was really truly a success? What is it they really are wanting to do, kind of in the big picture and on the heart level? To be at least have a sense of that, I think, is a great place to start the conversation.
Once an author becomes a client, what does that process look like? And I guess it'd be different for each of the pieces of your business, right?
Boy, I'll say it can look a variety of different ways. Sometimes I'll receive a manuscript that's incomplete, and we'll spend some time discussing on structural issues, organizational suggestions for the person to finish it. Sometimes I get the manuscript and it's in pretty good shape, and really only, say, line editing and copy editing is necessary. Sometimes I get clients, they have a project, a writing project. So it's not a book, but it's a writing project they're doing personally or professionally. And they could be at any point along the way where we pick up and I help them, again, craft it, hone it, finish it. That's one thing I love about the work is each project and each, person is very different. And so I learn a lot with every client.
What do you see as some common pitfalls that authors should avoid?
Well, I think the biggest pitfall is not truly committing to taking the time to actually write. So I know you probably interviewed people who said that in one way or another, that in order to finish a book, you really have to take the time to actually draft it and write it. And I've talked to many people where they have every intention to make sure they write it, between 2 or 4 o'clock on Saturday, and then they break that agreement with themselves. And so they don't make their timeline. And every time they break that agreement, their enthusiasm nicks away, and it gets harder to sit down and actually write. So it's to treat that writing time like you would a very important work meeting or a very important event with a loved one that you would never miss, and to not just say that and put it on the calendar, but actually do it. I think that's what I see more often than not is people, they say they're going to do it, and then they don't.
What do you wish more authors understood about the editorial process?
I think, if they're experienced authors, if they got to have a book or two under their belt, I think most understand different kinds of editing. But in my experience with first-time authors, that they can tend to think that editing just means one thing, whether they think it's copy editing or they think it's the developmental part of editing. So I think if they understood that there are different kinds of editing, and to be able to know what kind of editing they need, they get that with experience.
So why should an author work with a professional editor?
Well, I think the easy answer to that is that no one, I don't care how good an editor or proofer you are, no one can edit or proof their own work. I'm convinced of that. I'm here to tell about it with my own books. With my first book, I really thought I could proof it. Then it came out and boom, there were several typos. So as much as we think we can do it, we're too close to the material even when we leave it for a little while. So a professional editor can look at the content with fresh eyes to make sure it's being stated the best way possible and error-free.
So, okay, they've decided they are going to look for a professional editor. What tips do you recommend for finding the best fit, the best editor for that author?
Well, it relates to when a potential client comes to me, things I look for and talk to the potential client about I think their editor. I really want to make sure I get their goals. And as I was speaking to earlier, I really want to understand just the big picture of why they're writing what they're writing, what do they really want to accomplish, and how, and know kind of their passion that's fueling why they're writing what they're writing. I think it also helps the author with their potential editor to get some examples of previous work, even if it's just to, download an ebook or as an editor, sometimes I'll just send them, just things that I will show them. This was the before and this was the after kind of a thing. So I've got a collection of those that I have permission to do that with. But almost more importantly are the last two things. One, I think, is the editor really needs to have excellent interpersonal and communication skills. So, on the phone, they need to communicate effectively. Email must work well, must be timely. Their email writing skills. I know it sounds simple, but with some client-editor relations, they just need to be copacetic in that way. And that leads to the fourth, and that's compatibility. I really find that there's so many editors out there that really it's important before you hire someone, you really think that you're going to enjoy working with that person. And I think on the editor's end, I feel like I need to know the same. So we're going to, work on this project together. We're going to make it the best it can be. And in the process, we really want to, enjoy it and enjoy it together. So I'd say those four things I'd put on my checklist.
Now, when I talk to editors, I always like to ask indispensable resources. What do you consider the best reference books or books on the topic? What do you recommend? There
are so many great resource books out there. You know what I find today? I find I go on Twitter. I know this sounds odd, but I go on Twitter and I do hashtags. And I look, with the hashtags, editorial tips, writing tips, things like that. And I look at tweets and then go to different websites and see what those people are up to. And very quickly I can see whether that editor, seems to know what they're talking about or they don't. And they have great posts that are very topical. They're very current. And I think that realm in that world, I find that I get the most hot off the press information than any book could really give a person. That's what my practice is these days for what I do.
Was there a particular hashtag that you're following?
Well, I follow editorial tips. I follow writing tips, edit tips, editorial services. I found some great, colleagues through that. There's several, but those are ones that I go to, more often than not. In fact, I might even have found you on one of those.
I think it's important to tell people that, like, you and I met on Twitter, and a lot of authors still think that Twitter's a place to just blurt out, buy my book, and don't understand that the real power of Twitter is finding people and meeting people. I think it is good to bring that up, that we met on Twitter, and that's what Twitter's great for.
I feel that Twitter is a fantastic piece of a book campaign, and you're right. It's not just a tweet, buy my book. In fact, that can shoot you yourself in the foot. That's really not the power of it. As you say, the power is to create tweets that relate to your book and relate to the audience that you're trying to find that's already on Twitter roaming around. It's just like any other piece of a book publicity campaign. It's where are your readers? And on Twitter, it's very efficient to find them and to build community with them. And yes, once they know about you, they'll know that you have this book. So I treat it just like any other piece of a publicity campaign. And I think authors, if they knew more of that and weren't so shy, to really use it as a tool, it could make publicity campaigns a heck of a lot cheaper. The authors really need to know that.
And then if somebody listening wants to invest in a professional editor, whether you specifically or somebody, what do you recommend is these are the ways to have the manuscript as clean as possible before investing in a professional editor?
I think two simple things. One is, at least I work in mostly Microsoft Word, but is to go to a review function, whatever your word processing program is, and go so that it finds grammatical potential issues for you. It finds typos for you, tries to catch as many things as possible. Do one round of that, and then set it down. Close the file for at least a couple of days, maybe even more. Whatever you feel, you'll be able to go to it and pretend that you've never read it, and you can go to it with fresh eyes and read it again and feel your own responses. It's like, oh, that paragraph sounded great when I wrote it, but now I'm reading it as this objective person and going, that paragraph is too long. So try to look at it with an objective eye as much as possible. At the very least, try to look at it with fresh eyes so that you can catch what you didn't catch in the review catch process. So that's like two steps that in an editor, once you give it to that person, he or she they just do more rounds of that and hone it and hone it and hone it even more. But I think authors can start themselves, but it takes time to just set it down and get away from it for a little bit before your eyes return to it to really see and feel what's there.
Laura, what are the best ways for people to find you online?
I'm online at lauracarroll.com, LauraCarroll.com. See all about my services and the Live True bookstore there.
And links to social media, are those also all, I can just find them there on the website?
Yes, definitely. I'm on Facebook, Book Talk with Laura Carroll, and I'm on Twitter, at LauraCarroll88 on Twitter.
You said Book Talk with Laura Carroll? What is that?
That's on Facebook.
Like an author page?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought you were saying you had a talk show, and I thought, that's a whole other thing, but okay.
Right. Maybe one day.
All right. All right. Well, Laura, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us this episode. Be sure and catch every episode of DIY Author. We're available in iTunes and Stitcher, and of course we have our own dedicated app. Just go to your favorite app store and search for DIY Author. This is Chris Well saying thanks for listening. I hope you'll join me again. This has been DIY Author. Please visit us online at DIYauthor.com and be sure to sign up for our email newsletter. If you enjoyed this program, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. Until next time, keep writing. And remember, do it yourself doesn't have to mean do it alone.